more or
Maybe
less.
talk about when you first started with ACSP and what the early years were like, and
Okay.
then move into your presidency.
Okay. I was elected president of ACSP before there was an ACSP meeting in the current form at all. In 1979, I think Jay Chatterjee and I had just been elected as president. Jay Chatterjee and I and Ed McClure met in, I think it was Cleveland. Jay has probably given you the answer.
Cincinnati, maybe?
Oh, Cincinnati, right, Cincinnati. And at that moment, I was something of a surprise because a group of, a lot of faculty around the country had more or less decided they wanted me as president, even though neither they nor I had played a major role in what was a very small rump of the AIP that met for half a day at AIP meetings. Jay and Ed, who was my predecessor, a wonderful man who died much too young, and I met there, and we talked about the possibility of a separate meeting. The reason for that, in part, I suppose I should say there were two reasons. One was the field of academic planning in the university was becoming somewhat more academic, somewhat more rigorous, somewhat less craft training. PhDs were being hired and papers were being written. People wanted somewhere to talk about their work. And AIP was not a comfortable environment for that. By and large, the professional organization, not necessarily the professionals, did not like the academics very much. So we decided we would try to form a new organization, a new version of ACSP centered around an annual conference. AIP was merging with ASPO at that moment, and AIP met in the fall, ASPO met in the spring. So when they merged, they decided to have one spring conference. Now, a spring conference is terrible for academia because you can't do any recruitment. And furthermore, typically in April, it falls very close to finals. Whereas a fall conference in November allows you to recruit, and it gives you a good span before the end of the semester or even the end of the quarter. It was a very risky venture. Iz Stolman was absolutely against it and expressed his views and did his best to stop it. But we felt, and particularly I felt, and the people who had encouraged me to run, felt that APA, as I said, we need somewhere where it's respectable to talk about planning theory. You couldn't talk about planning theory at an AIP conference because everybody said, yeah, theory, terrible. And so we did. Largely, I think, or heavily through Jay's work and Ed's work, in the following year, I guess 1980, we had the first conference in the modern form. It was at the University of DC School of Hotel Management, and we had 100 people come, which was probably more than double ever ACSP had before. We thought we'd hit the jackpot. It was fantastic. And of course, the following year, we had probably 200 people, for all I know. At the same time, we were forming the Planning Accreditation Board, this time over the dead bodies of quite a few senior academics in planning who wanted no part of accreditation. But we felt that we wanted to improve the quality of the schools in general, and this was, whatever its drawbacks, the way to do it. Now I have to say that right from the outset, Marcia Feld was the secretary of the organization, and by all reasonable judgment now should have become president at some point, but didn't. And I think that's because we lived in that earlier time. Although we, I think, improved the situation quite a lot in terms of access for women and for minorities, it took time. And Marcia was an absolute pillar at the beginning. The other person who was critically important was Larry Susskind. I think Larry's force of personality and his ability to move people along was just incredibly important in the formation, especially of the Planning Accreditation Board. And he, and along with Carl Goldschmidt, were very important in that process. Since then, I've been coming to ACSP meetings. I've been to almost every one. I don't know how many I've missed, but a few. And I still enjoy them. They're wonderful. It's gotten amazingly large, which is great. But the quality is still there, I think, I hope.
Where do you see, do you have ideas of what you think the future of ACSP looks like?
Well, planning's about the future. But planners rarely plan very well. And I would say ACSP is a classic example of actually incremental planning with an occasional big leap. But the leap is more of faith than of analysis. Nonetheless, the reason we went this way was because so many people at that time were seeing analytic ways and scientific ways of understanding the world as being very important for planning. And I think that what we see now is a kind of melding of the two. I've noticed some wonderful papers here on microsimulation and on model building, and there have been impassioned papers about social justice and equality, and that's what the field is, and that's what I hope will go on being. People have often been pessimistic over the course of this organization's life, but I think I've generally tended to be an optimist. I wouldn't have taken on the position in the first place if I wasn't. And but we were very young, and we did not exactly know what we were doing, but we did know that we wanted somewhere where planning academics could talk to each other. And that's still what you see downstairs now. They're still talking, and it's good. For the future, it's hard to predict any future. That's part of the dilemma of planning. But the future of academic planning is tied up with the future of planning itself in society. And planning is always a profession and an activity that is slightly less than fully structured, always under some pressure, generally I would say a field that has to continue to renew itself. And my hope is that ACSP will do the same, not get caught up in fashions of the moment too much, although we always are. But at least seeing what I'm seeing here now, I think things are probably looking toward a reasonably bright future, depending on what happens in the larger world. But I won't refer to that right now.
Any last comments before?
I don't think so.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Ah, great job.